our third and final forum on stormwater management. When it rains, it seems to pour in Radnor Township, and tonight is no exception. Heavier rains, increased development, and an aging infrastructure have created stormwater problems that must be addressed. The Pennsylvania Stormwater Management Act, which was called Act 167, became law in 1978. And since that time, counties have been adopting plans to address issues on a watershed basis, while local municipalities have been charged to adopt ordinances to comply with such plans. Thanks to the passage of Act 68 of 2013, local governments now have a clear legal basis to create authorities on their own or jointly to acquire, construct, update, or to fund such projects. What does this mean to Radnor residents? As a result of decades of hard work, which is documented on the Radnor website, that's www.radnor.com, a proposed program and dedicated funding approach have been discussed at recent commissioners' meetings. To assist you in becoming an informed participant in the upcoming decision-making process, your understanding of the issues and its related costs are most important. The purpose of tonight's meeting is twofold. First, you will hear a brief overview about the township's stormwater issues, how they plan to address these matters, and their ideas for funding such improvements. Secondly, we will provide an opportunity for you to raise questions and hopefully receive answers regarding the proposed plan. It is now my pleasure to introduce our participants. Steve Norsini, who is our Director of Radnor Public Works Department, will be helping us to understand our present situation. Jean Haggerty, who is a consultant and an engineer from AMEC, will share proposed planning and its funding. Steve, I'd like to begin with you.
Thank you. And would like to thank everybody for coming out. I'd like to thank Roberta and the League of Women Voters for giving us this forum, for talking about something we've put a lot of time and energy into. And we'll start with some of Radnor's stormwater needs. We do have challenges here in Radnor Township. Every township does in varying amounts. You saw it coming in. You know, you saw the puddles on certain roads. You saw the pike, how the one lane starts to, fill up and pushes you out a little bit. We have aging storm sewer systems. We have continued development and redevelopment, and that's not a bad thing. It has to be managed, but it's also partly what keeps our township young, if you will. It keeps it interesting, and it keeps people coming in. We have impaired streams. There's state and federal regulations we're required to follow, and of course we know that we have some flooding issues in the township. Our resources are finite and decreasing, and the capital backlog is building. These issues are township-wide. This is a map of the political boundary of Radnor Township, and I know it's a little hard to tell, but on the big screens it's pretty evident that the issues we have are clearly a township-wide problem. It's no one distinct area. Those dots, dashes, and marks are all across the map in various ways for various issues. So what are we accomplishing now? We're reactive in our maintenance. What does that mean? That means basically when things break, we go fix them. All right, we don't have the resources to be proactive. Where we are proactive is oncoming storms, and that's our sanitary sewer and our storm sewer guys are always out cleaning inlets, making sure things are ready. But on these larger items, we are reactive. We do minor system repair, replacing a pipe, replacing inlets, repairing inlets, emergency repairs, street sweeping, leaf collection, and MS4 reporting. We'll get into a little bit of the MS4 reporting later. Leaf collection is part of our stormwater management program. I think everybody just thinks every fall we come get their leaves. They're very happy about that. And if you look at the 2002 pie chart, it shows the total program cost. In reality, the largest portion of that is the leaf collection because it's so very labor intensive and equipment intensive. And it takes us about 2 months. So that may give you the impression we're spending that much on capital projects. That's not the case. A lot of that is our leaf collection. Tonight is a perfect night to say, what are storm sewers? What are they for? What do they do? Well, they collect runoff and convey it to other places downhill. Eventually it goes to streams. Our system here in Radnor consists of 57 miles of pipe and about 1,500 inlets. Just to make sure everybody's clear, storm sewer is not sanitary sewer. Sanitary sewers are the sewers which handle the wastewater from your house and industrial and business. It's the water that goes down your sink, your shower, your toilet, your dishwasher, and washing machine. One of the things that part of this project, if this funding source does go through and is approved, is planning. Planning is huge. Planning is key. It takes time and it takes some money, but it is a way to attack a problem. I think everybody can agree when you have the ability to plan and look at a problem, you can come up with better solutions. Part of this planning involves the evaluation of what we have and what we need and mapping that, designing the solutions, and installing and or repairing or replacing what's there. Some of the township's storm sewer system is 7 years old. In some parts of the township, it's almost 100 years old. It's made out of terracotta pipe. That's the same pipe, that's the same material, I'm sorry, that the vases on your back deck are, or your porch. It's terracotta. A little thicker, a little different, but it is that material. A lot of our system is over 50 years old, and it's made up of corrugated metal pipe. And that note on the bottom states that the National Corrugated Metal Pipe Association lists the lifespan for galvanized metal pipe at 50 years. And I'm going to show you a pipe that's about 50 years old right there. The pipe you see here, it's a corrugated metal pipe from the 60s or 70s. You can see how deteriorated it is. You can see the dirt. You can see the soil through the bottom of the pipe. You can see how the pipe's literally falling apart. Really what's keeping the bottom of this pipe together is the soil that it sits in. This is in the southern portion of the township. Here's a terracotta stormwater pipe. Okay, this is that material I was talking about. You'll notice how much mud is in there. You'll notice there's a blockage up the other end, which our guys worked on. But look at the separation of the joints. Obviously, its carrying capacity is diminished, and it is in need of repair. This is a culvert, a galvanized metal arch culvert. It's actually on Marlbridge Road. So you can see a couple of things here. Look at the bottom. Look how rusted and deteriorated it is. This is where the culvert connects to a concrete footing. Probably the more interesting note there is the tree that is growing through the culvert. All these things that I've shown you are from the southern end of the town, or the southern part of the township, more the Bryn Mawr, Rosemont area, but they are indicative of other issues we have. Is all our pipe like that? No. These are special cases, but these are the things we need to address. Is Radnor Township alone in this situation? No. Many townships, states, local, county governments have similar needs. They vary from entity to entity. Here's another pipe we just recently found before the last meeting and took a picture of. This is where mapping comes in because we didn't even know we had it. And when we found it, obviously it's not going to convey any stormwater. It's completely full. Here's an inlet, one of the 1,500 inlets we noted. You can see how the brick is falling out and some of the parging has come down. These are items that need to be repaired or replaced. Planned replacement. So we talked about planning. Planned replacement. When we can do appropriate planning, repairs or replacements due to emergencies are reduced. When you have emergency repairs, right off the bat they cost more, up to 20% more. And also you have the concern of, there could be damage to a roadway. So when you're out there and you're able to go through your pipes and determine what needs to be done, we can reduce, not necessarily eliminate, but reduce emergency repairs. We hear a lot about MS4. Okay, this is one of the government items we mentioned. And MS4 stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. Okay, it's a federal mandate. It's an unfunded mandate. And it's administered by the DEP, Department of Environmental Protection. What I will tell you is this mandate does a lot of good, okay? It may sound bureaucratic, but it does a lot of good. This was what forced all the townships to start the mapping of their systems. This is what's improving water quality in townships. This is what requires us to do testing. And depending on where your locale is, it can be quite stringent regulations depending on where you're discharging to, what streams. But in the end, it really brought a lot of notoriety to what needs to be done, and it caused townships, whether they wanted to or not, to start doing something about it. Effective stormwater management, what's it involve? There is no one item. Obviously, it involves engineering. Nate, Gene, and myself, we're all engineers, so we like that part. Science is involved. Land use planning. So when a piece of property comes in, it's our job here at the township and through our consultants to make sure they meet the requirements of our zoning and subdivision land development ordinances, meet our stormwater management ordinance. Regulation and enforcement, it's our job to make sure what goes on out in the township. We enforce our rules and we regulate what goes on, and that goes back to land use planning. Communications, forums such as this, as well as regularly scheduled or special Board of Commissioners meetings, gives everybody an opportunity to come out and let their thoughts be known, to ask questions, as well as email us or call us. We're always available to talk about these things. So there is no single silver bullet that's going to solve all our problems. Okay, there's no single silver bullet that will take care of, you know, a single issue throughout the township. But there is many things that we can do to start to minimize the effects of stormwater runoff. And we're talking about some bigger things here, you know, when we talk about these projects in the MS4, but there's incremental things we can do that really help out. And people say, well, gee, what good does a rain garden do? It's a little patch on my lawn, or what good does a rain barrel do? But when you multiply that by hundreds and thousands of people, those little incremental things make changes, and they reduce runoff into our system. We're all downhill of somebody, so we take water from other municipalities. We also, our runoff goes to other municipalities. So that's why when Roberta mentioned the Watershed Method Act 167, that was a good thing. And our stormwater ordinance reflects that in like the Darby Cobbs and so forth. So I will turn this over to Gene, and then we'll do some Q&A.
And good evening, and thank you for coming out on such a beautiful evening. Great night to talk stormwater. Steve gave you a pretty good overview of the challenges, I think, and maybe even downplayed them a little bit. You know what the flooding issues can be in town. You know a lot of that is the aging infrastructure. There are new regulations that the community has to abide by. So the challenges are growing. The system has been in place for 80, 90, 100 years in some places. It's not going to get fixed overnight, but we'd like to talk to you about one approach that we have now to start to make a difference. So AMEC, who I represent, basically I do stormwater funding and program development for a living. When they hired us about 10 months ago, the challenges were pretty obvious. How do we start to get a handle on the cost for these improvements, and how do we look at a way to fund them? And so they asked us to go in and assess the level of community needs. What are the real issues out there? How much will it cost us? What does the community think about that? What are their priorities? And then discuss those ideas, in this case with an advisory committee. So we had a citizens advisory committee, 20 plus people, pretty diverse group of folks from across the community that what we would do is we'd get some ideas, we'd talk to Steve and his staff, and then we'd go to the advisory committee and review all those ideas with them, and they would give us lots of feedback. And they were a very active group and provide us excellent, I think, guidance. And what we're trying to get to is providing an option for funding the program in this, I'd say, the foreseeable future, the next 5 to 10 years. It's hard to look too much further down the road than that, but what can we get going on? And then take those recommendations and go to your Board of Commissioners and say, all right, here's an option. We think you should consider this in order to start making some progress in stormwater management. So we set out to answer a couple of really key questions. What is getting accomplished now? Steve gave you a little bit of an overview of that. Then what is not getting done, probably more importantly. Okay, here we had a basic level of service going. What do we need to be doing? What are those priorities? Flood mitigation is key, but also maintenance of that system that you have out there. Steve mentioned this 57 miles of pipe that you have in the ground that you've already invested in as a community. That's hundreds of millions of dollars if you had to replace that pipe. So instead of having to replace it, let's see if we can't maintain it a little better. Some of those examples you saw, maintenance will make the system last longer. So where does that fit on your priority list? What's the level of service you should be providing now? And by level of service, I mean, Do you want your grates cleaned every year or every month? How often do we need to do this work? What does the community expect from your public stormwater services group? And then once we figure out how much all this costs, how do you distribute those costs across everybody in the community? And that's one of the key things we'll talk about at the end here, what I think is a pretty good solution. So initially, what should the program look like? And the feedback we get, not overly aggressive, but let's start to make progress. Things should not be allowed to get any worse, and we should start to make things better. And how do we go about doing that? By balancing a couple of key things. Operation maintenance, again, maintaining that multi-million-dollar investment you already have. Start doing some of those repairs and rehabilitation, not just the things you're finding accidentally or when something collapses, but getting ahead of that, doing an assessment of your system and start to replace some of those systems in a more planned control way, as Steve alluded to. And then the regulatory compliance piece. The regulations continue to get more stringent, especially around water quality protection. And so how do you make sure that you're in line with those protections for new development and redevelopment? How do you make sure everybody's going in the right direction? So we did an exercise at the advisory committee, we call it Stormwater Bucks. Gave everybody $10 and said if you had to choose, knowing now a little bit about what our problems are, how would you spend your $10? And it was interesting. I mean, of 20 plus people, they all had their different priorities, but capital improvements, really starting to make sure that the system we have in place gets improved, and we start building a little more capacity into the system. 40% of money should go there. O&M, operation maintenance, about 30%. We should have a set aside for emergencies coming in tonight. We know with having more infrequent large storms all across the East Coast, and I guess across the country. If you saw the news in Denver today, I don't know if anybody saw that. Denver's had 8 inches of rain today in about 19 hours. How do we make sure we have a well-prepared emergency response team to get out there? Enforcement and compliance, we have a lot of rules on the books. Let's make sure we're enforcing those. Best practices are things that people may have on their property. If you develop a property, you might put a detention pond. There's requirements that they have to be maintained by that property owner. So how do we make sure that's getting done? And then finally, program management tools. And there's a lot of technology out there, GIS, which is GIS is a platform in order to track your mapping more easily. We can see a lot more information. We can put in where our location of all our facilities are. We can track with the last time we did the inspections there, how much money have we spent on the problem. Having those kind of tools will be more efficient. So building some efficiency into the system that you have now. So we actually, and I'm summarizing 10 months worth of work here in a few minutes. So excuse my trying to put it all together here, but 4 really key parts to this. The capital improvement plan. So we know that there's a backlog of projects of at least $10 million that have already been identified. All right, so this is work that has come up through just people in the community coming forward and saying these are our issues. Right, so we know that there's flooding in North Wayne, there's culverts that need repair in the east side of town. There's certainly lots of deteriorated pipe in the south part of town. How do we start to put a capital program together to address that? So just trying to get that backlog of $10 million done. One of the things we said, the level of service would be, let's get that done in 10 years. Doesn't sound super aggressive, but it's a huge difference from where you are now. And then look at all the work we're doing based on watershed. So you have two major watersheds in town. As we're doing the work, make sure that we're always looking upstream and downstream. Let's look at all our watershed implications as we're allowing new development and redevelopment. And then there's equipment that needs to be replaced. All of this takes work, takes equipment. That's a capital cost. It's not a big part of the program, but it's $20,000, $25,000 a year that we need to make sure that we're giving the tools to get the work done. And then under operation maintenance, same idea. 10-year plan to get out there and inspect every part of your system, do an assessment and mapping of that system. Okay, again, doesn't sound like a lot, but you've got a lot to cover, and it's costly to do. Get that done and start replacing on an annual basis a planned at least 1,000 linear feet of storm pipe every year. Okay, get that done. And then start to locate all the best management practices. And again, these are things like rain gardens, detention ponds, infiltration basins, things that are out there now managing stormwater on site. Make sure we have a good inventory of those and make sure they're being maintained properly. Make sure you're complying with your MS4 permit, because there are nasty fines from the regulatory agency if you don't. And they're really interested in documentation of everything you're doing. And then do some more public education. I mean, thank you for coming tonight, because really learning about what your stormwater system is in town is important, and then what can you do about it? You can't give good feedback to Steve and the leadership of the town if you don't know enough about it. So, Steve and his staff are always available, more than willing to go out to the community and talk to you. So providing more public education and more forums is key. And then program management. asset management tools we talked about, and also I'm going to show you how we think might distribute the costs. We're going to use something called aerial photography and GIS tools. They need to be updated on a pretty regular basis. You don't have a lot of change going on. Your growth is relatively stable, but again, you want to see what's on the ground every couple of years. It allows you to do that. So, all right, what will that all cost? The snapshot of your 2013 stormwater budget is you're spending about $1.1 million in 2013. As Steve noted, significant amount of that is on leaf collection and street sweeping and some basic processes, but you're doing some compliance issues and you're doing some program management, 1.1 million. You'll notice there's not a dollar value for capital improvement projects for 2013. So if something comes up, you have the opportunity to go to the board to ask for something, but there's no money dedicated to capital improvements for stormwater in 2013. What we're suggesting is that we develop a program for the first year that's about $2 million. So you're already spending $1 million. We're talking about adding $2 million for a stormwater program in Radnor of $3 million a year. So that's pretty significant. That's the average. We looked at a 10-year capital program, a 10-year stormwater program, capital operation maintenance. And these costs would be pretty average over that 10 years. So it's not a one-shot deal. This is a long-term investment. So how do we fund that? Typically now, your real estate taxes fund that $1.1 million that's being spent. So there's a portion of that that's going to that stormwater issue. Sometimes we can sell bonds, municipal bonds for big projects. We can get some grant money, but there's not a lot out there right now. I'll tell you, state and federal government are not putting a lot of money out there to get grants. And so the limitations of finding funding tend to be back on the ratepayers. And the ratepayers in this case, we're talking about potentially having a user fee. All right, so a stormwater user fee is just that. For services that are provided at by the public agency, there's a service fee that gets distributed across the community. It's dedicated to stormwater. All right, so you say that program of service is at $2 million. We need $2 million to get that level of service done. And so that's what it's meant to be specifically dedicated to. You always hope that you'll get some public-private partnerships. You have some great universities in town. Can we get them to help us do other things? That's great. That's often a one-time deal. But to really get your program going and be funded every year, you need a bigger issue. So general funds, your tax money, and user fees are the two big things that are going to get you there. So we looked at the dedicated stormwater fee. I'm going to talk a little bit about if you had to increase your real estate tax to get there, what that would look like on your tax bill, utilizing existing funds. I mean, this is a political question more than anything else, but is there some money left in your current budget that could be moved in to cover some of these costs? And then usually a combination of these things. So typically when you get to push comes to shove at the end, that's usually a combination of things. And there's an alternative we always carry around with us, which is we don't do anything different, we just keep going as we're going. And I think there's lots of people in the community that don't like that idea. Gail's here. So what are the pros and cons of doing this? Costs are distributed across a broader part of the community if we look at a user fee, because we use impervious area on a parcel. So anybody who has developed land contributes to the runoff, contributes to the problem, hopefully will contribute to the solution. So properties now that are tax exempt don't pay into the stormwater program because they're not paying any taxes, and that's how you're funding the program. So if you want to get more people involved, this is one way to go and do that. Fees are flexible. If some year you have a bigger need, they would go up. If you think you can take a year off, they can go down. I haven't seen a lot of them go down, to tell you the truth. But over time, if you can get some of those public-private partnerships and things, you have the flexibility to adjust the rate as you need it. And that would be an annual rate, just like your budget. The credit can be provided on reducing stormwater fees. So if you have a fee for your property and you've done something on your property that controls stormwater, you can get a credit for that. Basically, the public is avoiding a cost if somebody else is picking up that part of it. So that's a really, I think, an intriguing piece of this. And then once in place, it's about change management. So once we know how much impervious you have, we know what the program is, you're not going out there and you don't have a meter, you're not measuring the meter every month, you're just looking at change on impervious over time. Now, the cons. This is public policy. This is a change in public policy. You have politicians, this is a tough decision to ask people to put more money out of their pocket and to do it in a way that they're not familiar with. So it really does require building political support and educating the community. Part of taking the time today, and we had 20, 25 people here this afternoon and 50 last week. If some people are coming out and listening. I think we're on live. Somebody's watching TV. And we were educating people about what we think the needs are in one approach. And it takes some time. It can't be done overnight. I think we've heard a little bit that people feel like it's being rushed. Well, I came to Radnor in 2006 to start this conversation. We talked about trying to do something at the time, and then the recession hit, and everything kind of got stalled. And so this is not something that happened suddenly. It really has been a need that you've had for at least a dozen years. One of the other cons is you do have to have a new way of billing the system. So this is a new fee on a bill. So we typically use your tax billing system. It's by parcel. We're going to bill by parcel. Typically bill owners of parcels. So that works for us. But it does need somebody to maintain that billing file. And then I always say there are perceived winners and losers. If you're a tax-exempt property, you probably won't like this idea because you're going to have a fee now that's going to be based on impervious area. Or your property with just lots and lots of impervious, big parking lots, for instance. This can be costly. And so that's a different group that maybe somebody with a very small house with this small amount of impervious is going to like it because they're going to pay a lesser amount. It's going to be more, I think it makes them more comfortable that they can afford this. So there's folks that are going to like it and folks that aren't going to like it. So trying to see all those perspectives and try to find a middle ground is what we're trying to do here. Stormwater user fees are very popular in the United States. Western Kentucky University's study came out a couple months ago, quoting about 1,400 stormwater utilities in the U.S. I would argue that number a little bit, but that's pretty close, over 1,000 at least. I've personally worked on about 30, and Philadelphia's had theirs for 15 years, I think now. Mount Lebanon and Meadville, PA, both passed theirs in the last year. We got a chance to work with those communities. I've done work in North Carolina and Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. So you're not unique. You're all facing the same kind of issues. Your systems are aging, the regulations are increasing, and you've built out so that you really don't have a lot of room for improvements. So this is not unusual. So what you're hearing today is something that is becoming much more common. And I'd say this is very similar to what we have around water and wastewater. So when I talk about distribution of costs, I'm really looking at how do we take this cost and make it work, right? How do we spread this out around the community? So we need some way to do that. We need some data to help us figure that out. So we look at a rate methodology supported by available data. You have parcel information, you have parcel lines, you have aerial photography, and you have impervious cover on some of your property. So we use that as a basis to get started. Like water and wastewater, the idea of a stormwater user fee is not about what's really happening on the individual property. It really is what the public cost is and being spread out. So what I mean by that is whether you live 5 minutes from the water treatment plant or 5 miles from the water treatment plant, basically the service that you pay for a gallon of water is the same, but it might be a lot more energy to get to your house or a lot less. It's not about the individual cost to your home to get water. It's about the cost of the entire water system and then your piece of that, right? And that's kind of the same concept that we're going to use here. So if you have less impervious, you would pay less. So why is impervious important? Once you start developing and putting some man-made things on your land, you take away the natural ability to infiltrate water. That, whether you have 5 acres or 1 acre, when you put 1,000 square feet of impervious, you start to change the hydraulic capacity. That has to run off. The land cannot support more. So basically, that's kind of the standard that we look at. It's just an example of your aerial photography, so you'll know what I'm talking about as I refer to this. It's a big parcel of land in Radnor. The part that is in red is the amount that is impervious, right? So we actually look at these photos, and then we cut out the sections that are not. And so where there's grass and bushes and things like that, that's not impervious. So we've cut that out of the picture. And then we can do a calculation on how much impervious is on that parcel. So it's kind of just a sample of what you have for photos. The Center for Watershed Protection out of Maryland has done a lot of work on why impervious cover is a rational way to look at the impact of stormwater management. It's really related to water quality as much as anything. So as the amount of impervious goes up in a community, in a watershed, the impacts to water quality go up as well. So once you get to about 25% impervious, you're doing really nasty things to your streams because you've really increased the volume, and it does sediment removal, and everything gets there a little quicker, and it's kind of messy. So again, my point here is really that imperviousness has been proven over the years as kind of a good way to estimate impact on stormwater management. All right, so we know all that now. So what do we do about trying to figure out how to use this data? Our initial scope of work was to use what we call an ERU. All right, we didn't want to spend a lot of time building impervious data layer on all your single-family homes, so we did a sample of them. We did about 500 homes, and we said, how much impervious is there on those homes? And the average, the median, half above, half below, was 3,460 square feet of impervious in your single-family homes in Radnor. That's a pretty high amount from some of the communities we do, but you have some big lots and big parcels. And so we looked at billing all single families, just one billing unit for that. What would that mean? Everybody would get billed the same. And we took that idea to the advisory committee. All right, so all single families would get one billing unit. And non-residential properties, that big parking lot I showed you and others, would get a multiplier of that. So we could measure their impervious on those properties. And the response we got back was, we don't really like that idea. So whether you had 1,000 square feet on your home or 10,000 square feet, you would be paying the same. And it really didn't feel fair. So with the data we had, we went back and ran some algorithms, and I didn't do this work, so did a lot of math, and said, can we find a way to estimate, without having to measure all those homes, give a difference between levels of impervious on those properties? And surprisingly, this really related really well to lot size. So if you have a really small lot size, you tend to have less impervious. So we did a sample of those properties, and we went up to the next property, and went up to the next one. And so we've come up with an idea that says, if you have less than 7,000 square feet of lot size, if you have a tiny lot, you're going to have less impervious. Proved that out by the samples that we did, and said you would have one billing unit. And then those with the 7,000 to 20,000 square feet, on average, have about twice as much impervious. They would be at 2 billing units. 3, same goes up, 20,000 to 40, about 3. And then over an acre, it's kind of scattered. I can't say that it matches quite as well, but they have more in general. So decided to kind of set a cap at that. So if you're a residential property, you would have 4 tiers of billing. Now, non-residential properties will get billed for every 1,500 square feet of impervious, which is basically what the average would be on that small 0 to 7,000, right? So we tried to find a way that impervious was used, that made sense for you guys, that matched the data we had in Radnor. So we come up with that we could bill, using that idea, 35,590 billing units, 46 of those residential, 54 of those non-residential. And what it adds to the mix is 25% of the parcel of those billing units are on what are now tax-exempt properties. So they're in the mix now. So how much does it cost you if we do all that? Okay, I think that's what everyone wants to know, right? So we looked at two major, we looked at a lot of them, but the two major ones that got carried forward for the options for funding were to bond the capital program. So if you wanted to do sell municipal bonds, you keep the rate down, but you'd be basically borrowing over time. So you need 20 years to pay back the bonds. So we could keep the rate down a little bit if we borrow. So you could pay for each billing unit $36.60 a year for each billing unit. All right, so if you're in one of those homes that has 2 billing units, you're about $73 a year. And then we looked at another option was, let's not bond, let's pay cash, okay? So it's a community that really would like to keep up and not borrow more money. Pay as you go, the rate's going to go up because you're not going to pay over time, you're going to pay sooner. Do what you can. And the rate ends up at $56.64 per billing unit. So now you're at $113 if you're that house number 2. So this is the number you'll see in the ordinance that we're going to talk about, what the Board of Supervisors has, Board of Commissioners has endorsed right so far is let's look at this annual rate of cash and let's see what the public thinks about that. We ran that number against what we would do if you had to raise taxes to get the same place, okay? So looked at your tax rate, what the average residential property assessment is, around $315,000 is your average home price in town. So if we went the same way, the same program of services, about $2 million a year, your tax increase would be about $200 a year. So that just kind of gives you some way to kind of see the different impacts. So what did the SAC say to us? Get started now, don't wait. A lot of people think we've waited too long. And keep the rate flat for 5 years. People want to know what's expected of them for at least a couple of years. Don't be messing with it. Give us a couple of years to get some history behind us. Get some capital projects in the ground. The list of projects that we have used, that 10 million plus or minus, is really a very loose list of things that we would like to get done, but it needs more vetting. Somebody has to go out and look, can we put those projects in the ground? What would they cost? And we need a little more information about your existing system to see if that should be other projects there instead. But that level of funding, that $10 million, is what we're carrying forward. And then put a credit policy in place so people that are doing the right thing can get some money back. And one final recommendation from the advisory committee was to create a standing committee, once this gets approved, that would actually provide oversight. So citizens would oversight long-term to look at that rate and look at the program. The draft ordinance that is out on the website, and I think we have copies here tonight, is going to be considered at the next board meeting on September 23rd. They will be taking official public comment, so hopefully we taught you some things today that you can really take to heart and think about and then put public comment before your board. It is really the legal document to set up a stormwater user fee. So it has a user fee as a dedicated source of funding. It tells you what you could pay for, which is only stormwater projects, including capital and operation and maintenance and regulation, et cetera. It details that rate structure. The rate structure I described, residents 1 through 4 tiers, non-residential properties at 1,500 square feet, and sets the billing unit cost in that ordinance right now is $56 per, $56.64 per billing unit. Talks about billing and collection, how we do that, and then it says that a credit policy will be established. We haven't got that done yet, and so the idea would be, I believe the board's going to say within 6 months there'll be a focus group or advisory committee put together to bring back some feedback on what that should look like. The thing about a credit policy is you still need $2 million, so if you start making it too robust and giving people back a lot of money, then everybody else's rate goes up a little bit. So you really have to balance what you're going to credit. So that takes a little bit of time and some work. So I know that's rush, and I talk fast, and I'm from Boston, sorry. But I was trying to give you the overview so that we really can get some discussion going. Please ask questions. That's what Steve and I are here for. I can talk about process, and Steve can talk about local political issues. Roberta's going to bring you a microphone.
Thank you, Steve and Jean. We are being televised, so I will bring a microphone when you raise your hand to you. And would you please identify yourself and where you live before asking your question? Thanks.
My name is Judy Bloomgarden. I live on Runnymede Avenue in South Wayne. We obviously have had a lot of major storm water problems in that area. My question is, there seems to be a chunk, an area that has not been dealt with here at all, and that is the developing of the town. There has been a lot of development going on. A lot of areas have been tarred over and made impervious. And it seems to me that if Radnor wants to continue to develop, especially at the rate they have been developing, that the developers have to participate in improving what their situation is. Shouldn't they be part of paying some of the money that's involved here? Shouldn't they be credited if they're, that fee reduced if they're putting in more pervious surfaces? I think they're a big part of this equation, and I don't hear that they're being included in the consideration.
For your question. Two things. Developers don't typically own the land, so when the fee actually comes out, the owner will get the cost. But I think probably what you're getting at is when they're doing the development, how do we get them to behave differently, right? So since 2005, there are all new regulations. So a developer now has to meet the new stormwater regulations. We spent years having no regulation and then pretty limited regulation. So a developer now would have to put in best practices on their site, and they would have to sign a maintenance agreement that those best practices will be maintained. The township still has a liability, though, to make sure that happens. So they still have to do inspections and enforcement, but now we are trying to shift to that. And you see a lot more green, what I'll call green infrastructure, where they're limiting the amount of impervious and putting in more buffers and tree boxes and things like that. The new Pennsylvania stormwater regulations and BMP manual, we actually reference in the ordinance, starts to tell people you need to be doing these things now. And if you are doing those things and you do above and beyond what's required, you can get some credit. If you're just doing it just to kind of get by, the preliminary thought at least is that you won't get a credit. But if you're doing something that's really better, if you're really trying to make your sites better, and a lot of companies are trying to go green and trying to do that. So how do we reward them for doing that? Did I answer your question or just?
The answer is in part, but shouldn't there also have been a fee on the developers right from the beginning that, that they are adding to the problem or potentially adding to the problem and should be part of the solution?
You bring up a good point. I'm going to touch back on some of the things you first started on. As Jean had mentioned, she's dead on. In 2005, the stormwater ordinance was enacted in Radnor and many other places. So for years, there was development and there was stormwater management to a point. The methodology and what we do now is very different for the developments that have been done in the last 10 years versus what was done in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. That has changed. We have grading permits so that when you put an addition on your house, if you're adding more than 500 square feet of impervious, you have to do stormwater management, a small portion, to manage the new addition. So what does that do? That's helping us moving forward. We're not taking back what you already have. You know, if a home's 80 years old, it is what it is. But when you put that new patio on, you might have to do stormwater management. So we have all those incremental changes where we're trying to manage that and not make things any worse. From a development standpoint, there's really two things to look at. Depending on the type of development it is, let's say it's a typical subdivision with what's going to be a public dedicated road with 6 or 7 houses around that road. There's actually two things. So there's going to be a stormwater management portion that takes care of that street. And then as each house comes in, they're required to get a grading permit from the township, and each house has to do stormwater management, which the builder is doing. And obviously those costs are passed along to his customers, the folks that buy the houses. But the way we regulate that is we have our subdivision and land development ordinance, we have our stormwater management ordinance. So when these properties come in, it's our job at the township and with our consultants to make sure that the rules are met and that they're followed, that we go out and inspect them when they're being built and that they're being built properly. For the public improvements and those stormwater items, the builder does have to escrow money in an account that can only be released when the township states that it's been inspected and it's okay, and it gets our seal of approval. So those are some of the checks. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the legality of actually charging a developer. As Gene said, they're not usually the landowners per se for any length of time. They're equitable owners until it gets through subdivision, and then they own the ground and they're peeling lots off as they go. So I don't know if that's possible. But it did come up in our stakeholder advisory committee, the idea of if I'm a builder and I install stormwater management according to your ordinance, do I get a credit? And my answer was, speaking for me as your director of public works, no, because you have to meet that ordinance now. Whether we have a stormwater fee and a dedicated funding mechanism doesn't make a difference. You must meet that ordinance. To go for credit, there needs to be a way that you go over and above it. Something that we can quantify, and our consultant's working on that credit policy where it can be quantified, its actual numbers. What have you done more than we've required? So I understand what you're saying with the developers, but there is stormwater management when they come in, and that's whether it be a commercial property or just a few homes.
Steve, maybe the example of the Rite Aid development would help. I don't have a question. I just thought if you could explain to folks how the new Rite Aid building will have better stormwater management than the old Taco Bell and Blockbuster, because.
And Mrs. Morrison's right on about a few things. So we look at the old Blockbuster site, aside from not being real attractive in recent years, but it was pretty good when we all had kids and we were taking them there, 10 years ago. So that site was built years ago. There was no stormwater management on there. Basically, the water went into the inlets, the runoff went into the inlets, and down the pipe. Well, the new Rite Aid, which is being constructed there, it was very hard for anybody to see because of the mounds of dirt, but there's a sizable subsurface stormwater management system that was put in on that property. And the method is stormwater goes in, the pipe is perforated, surrounded by stone. There's a certain amount that will infiltrate into the ground. Depending on the frequency of the storm, there's going to be an orifice where the stormwater can go down the pipes. So you took a site that had no stormwater management, and now it's managed. And really this comes into play for some of the big things. Unfortunately, our planning commission met out at Villanova tonight to view the parking lot, and which is the proposed site of the dormitory, the housing project at Villanova. Unfortunately, their visit was cut short. I saw my colleague Kevin Kashansky, and they look pretty wet. But there's another site that you look at, and there's 7 or 9 acres of just asphalt with no stormwater controls whatsoever, that if it does get developed, we'll have, number one, it would have less impervious just by the virtue that it's all impervious now. but it would actually have stormwater controls, which there is none of now. So that's where, on that one slide, when we talk about redevelopment and infill development, aside from rejuvenating your community and keeping it lively, properties that, depending on what type of work is done, certain properties that never had any stormwater management will have stormwater management. So there's a net decrease in the runoff.
Hi, my name is John Sukonik. I live on Parks Run Lane. To what Steve was talking about, I agree, because I am a developer and builder by trade. I don't do anything in Radnor Township, and we have to put management functions in when we build houses, when we build developments. But my question is really in the billing schedule that you guys came up with. There is truth to the merit that if you have a 7,000 square foot lot, and that's one billing unit, the equivalent of that to an acre might be 6 billing units when you do it that way. But from a percentage standpoint, the impervious covered on a small lot is way significantly more than that on a large lot. So a person with 3,000 square feet of coverage on a 43,000 square foot lot, the amount of impervious runoff of that is significantly less than somebody who has a 7,000 square foot lot and 2,000 square feet of impervious. So the ratios, even though you're doing it based on lot size, the ratio is really based on, or should be based on, the percentage of impervious coverage. And I'm assuming that that was part of the talking in the negotiations, but I'd like to see how that played out.
And I think one of the reasons we tried to show you what the impervious cover methodology looks like is that it's not about what percent of your lot is developed. Though I mean, individually that's important to you, and we're trying to keep that down, but the reality is it's about the cumulative impact of impervious at all. So every time you put another 500 square feet of impervious, the regulations say you need to start to manage that. And so whether you only have 1,000 square feet and your lot is 7,000, or you have 1,000 and your lot is an acre, that we're only going to bill you for that 1,000. It doesn't matter what the percentage is. We did talk about this a lot at the advisory committee to look at different options for that. But I'm pretty confident over the years of doing this that we're really not going to look at those percentages at this point. Doesn't mean long-term, when you get more information. A lot of the utilities that are more mature, City of Charlotte, North Carolina, has gone out and done a lot more work on what else is on that lot, right? So if you've only paved 3,000 square feet and you have other turf that maybe doesn't drain well. I mean, there's other things that are going on. We don't have that data right now. We know what the size of your lot, we know how much impervious you have. So we're starting there, but I think it will mature over time. But right now, we're not looking at percentage impervious.
But one thing there, it maxes at 4 units.
Yeah, it does max at 4 units, and until we can get, we could have made it 10 more units. We could have kept going, but the data gets a little sketchy after you go over an acre. There's not a lot of homes, actually, that are, the numbers get really scattered over an acre. It's all over the place. What percentage is there? Yeah.
Right. Well, did you also look into how it would work in terms of if instead of doing based on lot area, did based on impervious ratio like you do on the commercial or non-residential, that if you had up to a certain square foot of impervious, it was a fee as opposed to the lot size? Because again, on a 1 acre lot, there's a lot more pervious surface in which the water can seep into. And then I live on a 1 acre lot. My neighbor across the street's a 1 acre lot. Mine has 2 seepage beds in it that all my roof water goes to, all my groundwater goes to, except for a little bit on the front. The neighbor has none, but the billing is the same.
Yeah.
So even though we are controlling the water management, I know you were talking about the potential of in the future getting involved with that, but to what extent can we do that up front?
Yeah. I think that you start getting into the issue around credits. So if your impervious is different than your neighbors because you're doing something on site, so you're doing some treatment, infiltration beds, things like that, that's the kind of thing we're talking about with credits. So if we start with all impervious is equal, right? And then we find out it's not, that you're doing something different. It's not coming off your property. You are retaining it on site. That's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get people to do things, retain stormwater on site. We've spent the last 50 years getting stormwater off sites, right? We built all these pipes. We got it to the local stream as fast as we possibly could. And now those streams are suffering because we did that. Now we've done 180, and we're trying to get it to stay on this. So we're trying to get to that same point that you're talking about. And that's why a credit program, especially on residential properties, is something that we need to spend some time on. And I do think we need to get better data. One of the comments we got a couple of weeks ago when we met was, can we move up in the program, getting new aerials and getting impervious on all those single-family homes? We haven't done that now. We're moving pretty quickly. It's a $30,000 to $50,000 investment to do that and to figure all that out. But if it's going to be more equitable, and it's going to get everybody to know exactly where they are, and it's going to get people to do more things that they can get credited for, then that's an investment that we'd like to make in the first year of the utility. So we just need to get some money to get that going. We can spend all night doing this.
One other comment question unrelated to the impervious. One of the things that's in the flyer that came out was talking about what you guys spoke about also with your staffing being on the tight side, as most of us have done in the real world. Things are tight because of the last couple of years. But there was something that you mentioned up there on the slide about when you get into an emergency situation, it costs more because if you can go out and take private bidding and consulting, you can do it at a reduced fee. There's a lot of services that Radnor Township does on behalf of the residents that could probably be saved a fair amount of money if they do it outsourced and privatized as opposed to in-house. Not saying it would be done better or worse, but definitely for a smaller fee, because there are companies that this is what they do, and it frees your actual staffing up to do things that may be the more important emergency situations or maintenance situations.
Involved with this program, one of the points I made clear right up front was that we're not looking for this to fund additional staffing. Okay, the plan would be that all that we do here, if this does get passed, would be through consultants and contractors. So when we go out and let's say we're going to clean, televise, and map storm sewer lines, that would be a sealed bid project that would go out. It would be managed in-house or by a consultant. So we wouldn't be increasing staff, and really what that would do is allow staff to continue what they're doing and maybe do more while the whole time we're outsourcing it. And really the beauty of that is on years, depending how the funding goes, again, if it happens, and it is a proposed ordinance, on years when there's less money for one specific portion, whether it be MS4, operations and maintenance, or capital, you just reduce the contract or eliminate the contract for 1 year. Whereas when you hire people permanently, that becomes a little more ticklish when there's less work. Believe me, there's plenty of work to do in the township that wouldn't be an issue, but that's the basis for how the mechanics of this plan would work should it go through.
Good evening. My name's Greg. I live in Wayne, over off of Radnor Chester Road. Like the previous speaker, I've got stormwater management at my house. We built an addition and have a large underground stormwater management system that not only manages the addition, but also the water from the original house. I understand that a lot of work and discussion needs to take place regarding a credit system, but I'm wondering if you could comment on what kind of form that is taken in other communities that have implemented a fee like this. Has it been a reduction in the number of units based on stormwater management, or a reduction in the rate, or something like that?
Yeah, I'll talk about a couple of other in Pennsylvania. So what Meadville and Mount Lebanon are doing, for example. So they looked at their program and they said, what cost of that program are you avoiding by having local homeowners or property owners do site management? Basically, by doing something on site, you're keeping the long-term capital needs down, right? So if everybody starts to do this, we don't have to keep building things. So you look at part of the program that's capital-driven. And here, your program is substantially capital. So that we tend to cap it at something that's around that percentage. So if the whole program cost is, in this case, about 60% of the cost is capital costs, if everybody does this over time, you're going to save that. So we might cap a program. I think Meadville is, I think it is 60%, not too dissimilar. And then you would look at how much of your impervious drains to that facility. So you can get 60% for the amount of the impervious that went to that facility. So you would send in an application. Steve or somebody that he hires would look at that and say, okay, that makes sense. You're doing water quality or water quantity control. It meets our requirements. You're doing the right thing. And every year you'd send in a little note that says, I am maintaining it. So one of the things that we usually tie it to is that you're maintaining that facility. So it's a good way to check that it's getting done. You get your credit as long as you certify that you're doing that. That's pretty typical. I can give you some websites to look at if you're interested in how some other communities have done that.
Hi, my name is Doug Blasey at 215 Upland Way. I'm glad to see the discussion of credits because I was here, I guess, both at the township meeting and then the first session, Gene, and I didn't think it was nearly as well developed, and I think it's really important. And if 50,000 is the cost, that's 0.5% of this proposed program, and I think it's money well spent to figure out what the real value is here. And as this fellow's example was similar to what I'd raised before. I've got dry wells in a 120-year-old house, and I know where most of my water's going. It's not going to the street, so there ought to be a way over time for people to rationalize that. That's point one. The other thing that I think is just a point of confusion, and it's maybe that me that's confused, but I don't think so, because Roberta had said this in the beginning when she mentioned Act 68, which empowers authorities. I don't think our township is thinking about creating a stormwater authority. Am I right there, Steve? And I do have another question, but a bigger one. But
That's correct. This process, as Gene mentioned, fast track though, started 10 months ago, but it is not for a authority that would be created under the Municipal Authorities Act of 1958, which is, I guess maybe the net effect is the same. You're trying to, whether it be a sanitary sewer authority, a water authority, but this is not an authority, no.
right, this would be an enlargement or a continuation of a traditional municipal function that is now going to be funded a different way. Okay. My bigger problem, and it's partly my kind of late entrance into this, because I haven't looked at that 2011 Chagrin Valley study. I'm not sure if I understand the studies that are being done in specific projects, but it does strike me that I'm not sure where we're going with this other than kind of replacing infrastructure that's aging. And I'm not complaining about that. But I know for example, if you say 20% of our streams are impaired, at some point there will be a TMDL component. And generally, that's volume reduction to try to address those TMDLs. So when people, I think, in the community think we have flooding, and that's the part that kind of bothers me here, that we have flooding problems. And this lady on the end, and your discussion was very good about new development. Flooding in many cases comes from the stuff that's here or the stuff we are getting from other communities, up gradient from us in some way, or from our own roads. So hopefully the new stuff moderates that and reduces it. But the things that are in place, if we've got flooding, generally you've got to channelize a stream or build a bigger pipe and try to get that water someplace else so it's not impacting the existing area. Now you can conceivably try to retain it above there, but if you just try to accelerate its moving through the community someplace else, we've got problems downstream, and that's not going to be allowed, and is not going to be consistent with our MS4 program, et cetera. So I'm kind of confused as to what the strategy overall is, particularly where we have these problem areas.
Doug, let me take the first shot, and then Steve can talk about Chagrin Valley and some of the work that's been done, the engineering studies. It's complicated, and there's not one solution. So one of the first things you can do is make sure the system that's out there is working to its greatest capacity. All right, so you saw some of those issues where you have blocked pipes, you have pipes where the joints are broken, so stormwater is not going in there. Make sure the system you put in the ground is working to its highest capacity so you can get as much stormwater in and out of there as possible. So that's part one. Part two is, let's find some more place to do storage, right? So we want to store some stormwater before it gets into people's basements. Where can we do that kind of thing? And Chagrin Valley's done a little bit of analysis on where some of the hydraulic problems are in town, where you're having, the system isn't sized correctly, so you need bigger pipes. So it's all those things, and that's the hard part about a capital program. How do you decide what to do first? And so Steve's done some work with his other consultants on how do you prioritize these things. Public health and safety's got to be the first thing that everybody worries about. So you can't have the road in front of the fire station blocked every time it rains. And so how do you make sure you're dealing with that problem so that your emergency services can get out? You can't be worried about people getting swept away in the water. So how do you start worrying about where those bigger problems are? So the first thing really is to get your arms around 4 or 5 of those big projects and start working on those. We know where some of the major problems are. We know some of those first steps to take, and then we need to get some more studies going for the next piece. And the money hasn't even been there to do really detailed studies, the hydraulic analysis and the work that we do. But there's some pretty obvious things to get started on. So I'll let Steve talk about Chagrin Valley and what they found, but I think the strategy is not to do just one thing. It's to promote green infrastructure, so we're making a change as we go forward. It's getting the system to work to the best of its ability. It's expanding it where we have to, and let's get some more storage room available so that we can take some of that water and put it places where it won't do damage. That's the idea.
Do we have any sense of what percentage of storage we might find to address existing? Do we have any sense of what percentage we might get by enhancing storage capacity?
Well, I'm going to back up just 1 second on your original question to follow up on what Jean said, and she had actually spoke about this earlier. In the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, everybody had their 10 stormwater bucks, right? And they got to vote to where it went. So they went up on the board and put it there. So there's 3 basic categories of what we're proposing. One is regulation, MS4. The other is, operations, maintenance, repair. And the other was capital projects. So those capital projects could go to be where one of those areas has serious flooding problems. Now, storage is going to be tough in Radnor Township. We're a developed community, and we have some real density in certain portions of the township. So the Chagrin Valley study actually looked at areas as to where could you do this. One of their suggestions, by no means it's going to happen, but one of their suggestions was, you own some public ground, that's a place where you could do it. But there comes the conundrum. That public ground is also recreational space. It's ball fields, soccer fields, lacrosse fields, the whole 9 yards. So that's a problem. We have done work from a preliminary design standpoint on the North Wayne field. Okay, so we actually have some plans on that. But Jean, I think, hit the nail on the head. We haven't had the money to do detailed analysis of things. So the Chagrin Valley report was a high-level report. It noted our issues, and it noted possible solutions, things that could be done. Some involved, just as you said, storage. Others involved conveyance. It was really a mix. And I think what's going to end up happening in the township, because our space is so tough, you're going to see combinations of many different things. You might see some small storage with infiltration, and it might move down that way because, it's not like in the 50s when there was a lot of farmland here and you had the ability when a subdivision went in to put in a basin. Well, we're pretty built out, and the infill building doesn't really allow that. So that's what I see happening. But as far as the detailed study, the Chagrin Valley report was a large part of the basis for how these things were priced, plus budget items and staff input. The next step is to take that high-level look and at least get to preliminary design. So I'm sorry for the long-winded answer. We don't know that yet. We'd like to know that.
Please don't hesitate. If you have a question, raise your hand.
One other question that I had, in the budget information that you had, it showed 2013 as being $0 towards capital improvements. And this may be more towards the supervisors and probably more towards the supervisors of the past couple decades. But apparently, no money is going into capital improvement reserves in the budgets.
Well, there are commissioners here in your township. They're not supervisors. So they're
Commissioners, my apologies.
We'll get that one out there. So if there's surplus funds, the commissioners have, certain areas they could put that into. It could be OPEB, it could be pension funding. This program is really designed to be the dedicated funding source. So what's happened over previous years, for whatever reason, that stormwater wasn't funded. Now, this year, in 2013, there was no funding for capital. We knew that. But in past years, there may or may not have been funding. It may have been noted in a budget. It may not have been spent. So really, this ordinance, and if this dedicated source is enacted, it gives us just that, a dedicated source that the funds will not be integrated with other general funds or sewer funds or anything like that, strictly for stormwater management. And when I say stormwater management, that runs the gamut of MS4, capital projects, operations, and maintenance.
Yeah, well, the question was more of, from a budgetary standpoint, I understand that these fees are going for this, and I'm very supportive of that because the infrastructure improvement has to get done. But when we develop communities, especially ones that have associations and other townships that we work in, there's a capital reserve that's set up. We own apartment units. There's a capital reserve set up. So over the course of the years, money is put aside for capital reserves so that when you need capital improvements, that money's already there as opposed to going out searching for it. And I guess it's more of a question for previous budgets from the previous commissioners and administrations. But if money was put aside when we develop a piece of ground and it gets dedicated to the township now owns and maintains that, there should be infrastructure improvement, whether it's road, stormwater, sanitary, whatever it is that is part of their charge of maintenance. The capital reserve should always be put aside, even in small increments, so that over the course of years, you get to the end of the 50-year life of a corrugated metal pipe, you have the monies already set aside for those repairs and maintenance. It looks like we're getting to that stage where this is going to start to develop, but it may just be a hypothetical question as to why this hasn't been going on.
Well,
Maybe you should tell them what day you start work and what days you pass.
yeah, that would be in a perfect world, okay? There's no doubt if we had sinking funds for everything as they came about. But just like any other budget, a township, and Gene, actually, it's one of the notes AMEC brings up in a lot of the reports, competing requirements for these funds. So, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I cannot answer for 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Basically, in this township right now, you have a manager here, I guess that's here 3 years, and the senior level staff anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 years. So I really can't give you much information on what went on. But there are competing resources for this. So any township, you may have a capital reserve, or you have a paving program, you have storm pipe. Sanitary sewer is different. It is its own fund, and it's funded based on the water you use. So we pull that out. You may have structures that you use. So I understand what you're saying, and this is that step. This is the way to say, okay, we're going to fund some manner of this improvement, and we're going to hopefully continue it, but we're going to make big strides, in coming years beyond what we've been able to do.
Hi, Steve. You just said something that prompted another question. In terms of a dedicated source of funding, is what we're talking about looking to replace the funding? I understand up to this point it's been roughly $1 million a year that's come out of the general fund, or is it looking to enhance that? So, in other words, would you still be funding $1 million a year of stormwater management out of general funds?
Yeah, the program that we have now in front of you is just the enhancement. So $1 million continues to be spent the way it's being spent. that often, if you do have a user fee in place, may change over time, but right now, leave that separate, do the enhancement with the new program. And related to that, when we run the rate models, we build in an operating fund for this new enterprise fund. So you can do like you would with the water and wastewater fee. Every year when you do put something new in the ground, you're putting some reserve funds aside, and so your maintenance program grows a little bit over time to make sure you're doing that. So that's the advantage, that it is dedicated and you have that backup reserve.
Steve, one of the areas where I see obvious stormwater problem is Aberdeen and Lancaster, because I go through that intersection. And the grate, which is on Route 30, I believe is a state road. So the question more broadly, and I think as you get to St. David's and Lancaster, there are other ones where this happens. I don't know whether the township views the drainage is being maintained by it, or is that only by PennDOT? And to the extent PennDOT is a component of this, or the county in terms of county roads, could you tell us how that fits into the planning?
Sure. We actually talked about this at the first meeting with PennDOT. And we're in pretty regular contact, myself and the other guys in Public Works, with PennDOT, especially on their maintenance side. And I can tell you they are severely strapped for funds. Okay, I think, and I'm by no means am I slamming them or bad-mouthing anybody. They are very limited in what they can do. I actually met out with them at that intersection about 2 months ago. And PennDOT, you know, as you look at government, local government, your townships, we're very close to the people, right? We are your first touch, your first blush with government. So we react and we contact all the time. As you go to the state level, there's a disconnect because you work for the state, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So when you call, I may never see you again. I could see everybody in this room. I've actually seen most of the people in this room several times, if not more. So there's a little bit, that local push is not there. What PennDOT, what I had asked them to do on my last touch with them was to go down Lancaster Pike from St. David's up to the line and start to clean the pipes, because we were actually just talking about this on the way in. The right-hand westbound lane in a heavy storm, when you get heavy rains, really starts to pond out to about the middle of that lane. So it either pushes the cars out or there's a lot of puddles. And PennDOT, one of the responses was, well, we know where our pipes cross. We're not really sure where they go down the road, you know, where they parallel the road. And I said, well, geez, now would be a good time to find that out. You know, meaning to me that those pipes have not been maintained for many, many, many years. The reality of it is we're all competing for funds. PennDOTs are down. Their grants have been reduced. You know, there is the tip, and maybe you can tie a stormwater management as part of a transportation project. I think we're going to have to try to partner with PennDOT, and we do it sometimes on the maintenance side, on very small things. I think it may come to the point where we just have to do something on our own if it's a state road. And that's just me speaking, the 7 elected officials that sit up there. All of this is their decision, and we've made very clear throughout the process that when it comes time for what projects are done and where, it is the board that will decide what goes on. Unless PennDOT's finances change, I think at one point, like I say, a partnership is possible, and we may just have to take on smaller things into our own hands. But it's so very, very costly. There's a storm sewer pipe on South Wayne near Runnymede that runs by the middle school that's PennDOT's. Now, that's been in bad shape now. We met out there 2 summers ago. I don't know. We go out and put Band-Aids on it for them because we don't want a car to fall in. But that's their pipe to repair. I don't know, you know, where that stands. And then you have Darby Paoli Road, the Stone Arch Culvert, which is PennDOT's. You know, that is now damaged, so there's an unbudgeted item for them, which I'm sure is not a great thing.
Maybe just to finish, I take it those programs that are not in our budget, are not in your budget.
No.
That 10 million right now is not covering that. That's all I want.
That's correct. And that's something we'd have to work towards.
Yeah, my name's Mike Carson. I live in Oak Lane in the North Wayne area. And I was just curious as to the experience that other communities have had that have gone down this road, and I think you mentioned there's some that have been down this road for quite a while. And what success have they achieved? Can you address that and say, yeah, and Community X, they did this 10 years ago, and now they've really resolved their problems. Can you address that?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I spent several years doing this work in North Carolina, so let me talk a little bit about things that have been in the ground for quite a few years. So Greensboro, North Carolina, Winston-Salem, lots of communities. In 2003, when the stormwater regulations hit a lot of smaller communities, they were already experiencing some flooding issues. They were building up pretty quickly. And so they tried to get ahead of this idea of putting stormwater first. They're pretty thoughtful communities. They have very mature programs now. If you go to Greensboro, North Carolina, and it rains like it rained tonight, you won't know it's raining. Because what they did with a lot of their money is they bought up public lands along both sides of the streams. One of their key things was to go in and make sure they owned 100 feet on either side of any creek that they could get. So they really went after storage areas. They had a couple of $1 million. I lived in Greensboro for a while. My rate was $9 a month on my stormwater user fee. But we felt like it was well worth it if you lived in the community, because really it made a huge difference. They are a very mature program now. They actually have gone out and they have aerophotography on every property in town, and everybody's built on actual impervious area. Again, they did that after about 4 or 5 years of the program. Meadville, Pennsylvania just passed theirs and started billing in January of this year. They're a small town, 15,000 people. Lots of state and county property, so they had a lot of tax-exempt property. They were able to go from a budget of $300,000 to $900,000. Doesn't sound like much, but it has been a huge difference on maintaining all their grates and infrastructure. They actually have a maintenance crew out there. And so the same thing, when they're having rains like we see tonight, the puddles are not as bad. The water's receding quicker. We're not worried about public safety so much. You don't have everybody out putting up sawhorses across the road, which is the way they used to manage it. All they do is tell you to stay away. So they've made huge progress, and people are really happy with the first year of that program. As I said, there's 1,000 of these, and gladly give you some other websites. I don't know. I do know there was one that actually got overturned in James City County, Virginia. They passed theirs, and then the political will changed. They had a new group, and they took it away again, and now they're kind of kicking their butt because they're in the Chesapeake Bay TMDL area, and they have a lot of now regulatory requirements, and they don't have a dedicated fund. So they're kind of trying to figure out how to get that money. So I'd say there's been some more success stories than failures, and I think it really becomes, for success, critical for Steve and the township, once it's happened, to show results. Get those projects in the ground that we're talking about, get that report card back out to the public that things are happening. I mean, that's what's going to decide whether it's successful or not, and that's going to take you 2 or 3 years to get there. But I think if you do and you take your job seriously and report back, which Steve's been over 2 years, you've seen a huge change already. Give him a little more money to get some stuff done. I think you'll see real results. Sorry, TMDL is a total maximum daily load. So it's a pollutant loading in the Chesapeake Bay, any counties that drain in that, and this is properties from New York, all right, that drain to the Bay, in Virginia, Delaware, 6 states in the District of Columbia. What they say is there's too much phosphorus and nitrogen and sediment in the Chesapeake Bay, and so they're requiring water quality improvements in all those communities upstream, and the cost for that is estimated in the billions of dollars. So you're just outside the Chesapeake Bay drainage area here, but there's a lot of Pennsylvania communities that are in, and you'll see probably some of those communities moving forward a little quicker. They've got to find some money to start doing regulatory compliance issues.
The questions. I have 2 questions that were brought forth after the meeting this afternoon. And one was, have you approached the private institutions to see if they can support this initiative without adopting the proposed fee for all residents?
Okay, thank you. And I don't have the exact numbers, but what Gene showed you on these slides, one of the things about this program that is good is that it would bring in those nonprofits and those entities that do contribute to stormwater, that do have stormwater runoff, but currently don't pay property taxes because they're nonprofits. So this program would basically put everybody on equal footing. Anecdotally, I'm going to tell you, I don't think there's enough revenue based on the fee schedule right now to obtain the funds we need to do this program, because I think you said there was 35,000 billing units, and so if you look at 54% being non-residential, that may mean, a business owner who does pay property taxes. So, really what you're getting down to is the schools, churches, and I don't believe there's enough schools and churches and impervious surface on those properties to fund a program of this magnitude.
The second question that was raised this afternoon is, have you considered placing a fee on all properties with 10 or more parking sites and using that as the basis?
I think by the virtue of the way AMEC did their analysis, if you're a commercial entity and you have parking spaces, you're charged for that impervious surface. So whether it be 5 parking spaces or 50, they're being charged on that square footage.
I'll give you one more minute to give you some time to think if you have another question.
Well, I really, thank you. I think the community in Radnor is coming together around knowing you need to do something. So I hope that you make your voices known to your board of what you think the right thing to do is. This may not be the perfect solution, but it really is a good step in the right direction. So please make your comments known. Really appreciate you coming out tonight. Please go home safely.
Thank you all very much. It's great to meet you. Thank you.
And finally, I would like to thank you on behalf of the League of Women Voters for coming, and we hope this will whet your appetite to become further involved and participate in public policy, because civic engagement makes a difference. Thank you.